Special Reports bar fight. The Attorney General says the president's tweets about active criminal cases make his job impossible. Is that aimed at restoring his tattered image with his own prosecutors in Congress?
I cannot do my job here at the department with a constant background commentary that undercuts me.
Pressure points. As he climbs in the polls, Mike Bloomberg poses a bigger challenge to Joe Biden, while the former frontrunner clings to hope that he can win in South Carolina. What happens if Joe Biden does not win South Carolina?
He would be in a very precarious situation.
And deal reached. A tentative agreement may have been made between the U.S. and the Taliban in order to draw down American troops from our longest war. But former Defense Secretary Ash Carter does not trust the Taliban to live up to it.
I would keep a small U.S. presence in Afghanistan, continue to help the Afghan security forces to strengthen themselves. I mean, the Taliban, remember what these people stand for. They took the country back to the Middle Ages. So I'm a skeptic.
And more on my interview with Ash Carter coming up as we have breaking news today. Good day. I'm Andrea Mitchell in Washington, where President Trump is still claiming he did not interfere in Roger Stone's sentencing, despite his tweet pressing for a lighter sentence. William Barr surprised many with his declaration that Mr. Trump should not be tweeting about criminal cases, a rare rebuke on ABC from the Attorney General, famously loyal to the president's wishes.
You're saying you have a problem with the tweets?
Yes, well, I have a problem with some of the tweets. I'm happy to say that, in fact, the president has never asked me to do anything in a criminal case. However, to have public statements and tweets made about the department, about our people in the department, our men and women here, about cases pending in the department, and about judges before whom we have cases, make it impossible for me to do my job.
The president going right back to Twitter this morning to take issue with at least one comment from that interview. The president saying he does have the legal right to interfere in criminal investigations if he ever chooses to do so. Democrats still say the fix is in and that this supposed declaration of independence by the Attorney General is all for show after an unprecedented series of resignations and criticism from elected prosecutors around the nation of how the Stone case is being handled. Joining me now, Washington Post White House Bureau Chief Phil Rucker, co-author of A Very Stable Genius, Donald J. Trump's Testing of America, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, we should point out. Reuters White House correspondent Jeff Mason, and Matt Miller, former chief spokesman to Attorney General Eric Holder. First to you, Matt Miller. You know the Justice Department better than any of the rest of us. It just seems as though this series of developments on the Stone case are so unprecedented, so shocking to people inside and outside DOJ, that what the Attorney General has done in this interview with ABC does seem to be more for show. How do we judge it?
So let me put it this way. Today marks 1 year that Bill Barr has been Attorney General. It's the 1-year anniversary of him being in that job. In that time, the president has tweeted and spoken dozens and dozens of times about the people who work at the department, about former employees of the department, about pending cases, about potential investigations. And Barr has never objected to that before. I think the difference that happened this week is that the president did it in such a way when Barr was intervening in a case that involves a close ally of the president who has been convicted of lying to protect the president. It made Barr's position untenable inside the department. And I think you have to look at it. There's a great anecdote in Phil's book about how when the Mueller report was transmitted to the Justice Department, the president really wanted to call over to Bill Barr and ask what he was going to do about it. But people told him, you know what, just trust the Attorney General. He will do the right thing, meaning in the president's terms, the right thing to protect the president. And the Attorney General did. And I think for a year, the Attorney General has been doing everything the president wants within his capabilities. He's been launching investigations into the president's perceived opponents. He's been trying to steer investigations into the president's political allies in the most beneficial way to the president. And finally, it blew up in a way this week because the president couldn't just take the help that Barr is giving him, it blew up publicly in such a way that it became untenable for Barr inside the department. And you had not just the 4 prosecutors who withdrew from the case, but I suspect other people in the department who were willing to take action, maybe to walk out, maybe to pull themselves off of cases, that would have made it very hard for Bill Barr to continue to carry out his job the way the president actually wants him to do. And I think that's why you see the Barr doing.
Wasn't there criticism of the president's tweets about a juror, the foreperson of the case? Wasn't that criticized by a chief judge in one of the courts here?
It was, in the chief judge for the District of D.C. I think, you know, we've gotten used to the president attacking all sorts of people on Twitter. The president attacking a private citizen who was just doing her civic duty is one of, I think, the lowest, the really lowest things he has done. You know, he's attacking this juror because she's a Democrat, was a former Democratic candidate for office. That's, first of all, irrelevant. People on both parties obviously serve on juries. We expect them to do their job, and it's something that was known to the Stone case. And
the defense never objected.
Yeah, to the Stone defense, they never objected. I think you see the chief judge for that circuit, pushing back because the president is really calling into question the ability of the judicial system to do its job. You know, it's going to be hard for the public to have confidence in the sentence in the Stone case, no matter what the judge does, because of this inappropriate interference by the president and the inappropriate interference by the attorney general pulling back the original sentencing filing. They have really brought question not just to the Justice Department, but also, unfortunately, to the ultimate outcome of this case.
You know, Phil Rucker, in your book, you outline case after case, the episode in the tank, certainly at the Pentagon, signifying so much distress by Secretary of State, by Secretary of Defense, who ended up resigning. The Secretary of State was fired. We've seen institution after institution diminished by the president. The intelligence agencies, the State Department, certainly notably. But the Justice Department has always, you know, until now and until the tenure of this Attorney General, been a separate entity that could not be politicized.
Yeah, I think that's right, Andrea, but what we're seeing is a president determined to try to politicize the Justice Department. He has been venting publicly for all of us to see for months now about the way the Justice Department handled the Russia investigation, about what the president sees as wrongdoing in the origins of that investigation and in the execution of it, and in the final conclusions reached by Robert Mueller, the special counsel. And what you're seeing now with Attorney General Bill Barr is an Attorney General more willing to follow what the president wants done, willing to open that investigation as he did into the Russia investigation, which is going to, the findings of which we expect to come out at some point here in the near future. And the president, because he got away from the Russia investigation without legal consequence, because he survived the impeachment proceedings in office, acquitted by the Senate, he feels empowered, according to the people I've spoken with in recent days, empowered to exercise his power as he sees fit and to do what he wants to do without fear of ramifications or repercussions.
Phil, is this the ultimate expression of what the late, great Senator Moynihan used to call defining deviancy down? We are now just getting used to all of this?
I don't know, Andrea. It's not for me to say that, but this is certainly has been the normal for some time in this administration and probably will be, whether it's another year or another 5 years. Well,
when we talk about this, Jeff, I mean, Daniel Patrick Moynihan was talking about the norms that have always been established in institutions and how they become politicized. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah, Matt and I were talking about it before, just a little bit, how people's sort of appetite / outrage meter has changed because of everything that has happened over the last 3 years. What I found interesting over the last 24 to 48 hours is how the White House has responded to it. Last night, you had Stephanie Grissom releasing a statement saying, Bill Barr's comments don't bother the president at all. The president has the right to express these opinions. Their relationship is strong. It seemed like one of those rare moments when the White House thought and the president thought, this is a time to hold my fire. Because if you look at Bill Barr's words versus his deeds, this is someone who's been such a supporter of the president for virtually everything that he wanted as a member of his cabinet. Then today, probably because the president's been watching the news coverage and it's been getting a lot of play, the president felt like he needed to send out that tweet saying, I do have a legal right to weigh in on criminal cases, even though I haven't so far. That seemed to give just sort of a window into his thinking that, yes, he's okay tolerating what Bill Barr said about him, even though it was critical, but only to so far of an extent.
So he has a legal right, although it hasn't been the practice of presidents to weigh in. And in fact, there was a notable occasion back with Richard Nixon talking about a case that was pending, and a lot of storm over that.
Yeah, so look, it depends what you mean by the right. It is true, there is nothing in the Constitution, there's nothing in statute, there's nothing in regulation that prevents the president from taking complete control of the Justice Department and ordering the Attorney General to carry out his directions, both in dropping cases and in bringing cases. But in practice, the norm since Watergate has been that there has been independence from the White House at the Justice Department. So the president can't use the Justice Department, can't use the power of the state to investigate people, to prosecute people, to incarcerate people for his own political gains. The president obviously does not believe in that norm. I don't think that Bill Barr really believes in that norm, just based on his actions. Like, leave aside the words that he used yesterday, but if you look at his actions, he's doing everything the president wants. He just doesn't want the president giving up the game by talking about it publicly.
And I just before you go, Phil Rucker, I wanted to ask you how you read the return of Hope Hicks.
Yeah, Andrea, it's significant. Hope Hicks was one of the president's closest confidants and advisors throughout the campaign, from day one of the campaign in 2016. And in that first year in the White House, her title when she left the White House was communications director, but her influence was beyond that. She sat outside the president, outside the Oval Office, and spoke with him all day about everything. And her return, I think, for the president is going to be something of a comfort blanket. She's somebody who he is very comfortable around and talking to, and as he enters the campaign and the heat of what could be a rather acrimonious and difficult re-election campaign, he's probably going to be leaning on her for her political and communications advice.
Phil Rucker, Jeff Mason, Matt Miller, thank you all. Nevada's powerful culinary workers union has decided not to endorse any of the Democrats in next week's caucus. The 60,000-member union has criticized Bernie Sanders, though, for his Medicare for All plan, which the union claims would jeopardize their hard-fought union benefits. Now the union says that criticism has led to a barrage of online attacks from Sanders supporters. The decision not to endorse is a blow to former Vice President Joe Biden, who needs all the support he can get, now more than ever. Joining me now from Las Vegas, MSNBC road warrior Garrett Haake, Dan Balls, chief political correspondent for The Washington Post, and Yamiche Alcindor, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Welcome all. Garrett, first to you out there, the Nevada caucus. Of course, it's a caucus. Let's first of all talk about the procedures. They're not using the same app that Iowa used, are they? Or are they?
No, they're not, but they are using a digital tool for check-in and for vote counting. And in Nevada, there's another wrinkle because there's actually early voting that starts this weekend. So they'll have early votes cast. People will cast votes for several candidates. Then those numbers get incorporated into the caucus process that happens a week from Tuesday. So, excuse me, the following week. So there's an added level of complication here with the early vote, even without the app and tool-based process that was such a problem in Iowa. I've talked to a lot of voters about this. The Nevada caucus has, generally speaking, been a well-run operation. They've not had the same kinds of problems that Iowa has, but a lot of Nevada Democrats are nervous, including the campaigns, to make sure this goes smoothly and we don't have a repeat of Iowa.
Indeed. And Dan Balls, what about Joe Biden? He has to do well in Nevada because the next step is South Carolina. And in South Carolina, he's facing some real competition. Competition for the crucial African-American vote. Tom Steyer is there, who hasn't placed almost anywhere so far, but is doing very well, apparently, by spending a lot of money in South Carolina and trying to court the African-American vote.
Andrea, you're right. Vice President Biden needs a good showing in Nevada in order to tee up the following week in South Carolina, which has always been, and now even more so, is his firewall, or we will see whether it remains his firewall. There's been a kind of an interesting switch in the way he's talked about things. Earlier on, he and his people said that he was the candidate who had the broadest support across the party. He has not been able to translate that into votes in either of the predominantly white states that started the process, Iowa and New Hampshire. Now what he's saying is that he is, in essence, the candidate of black voters, and black voters will decide this nomination. It is crucial for him to do extremely well in South Carolina. His people believe, given the fluidity and the volatility and everything we've seen over the last few weeks, that there is a way for him to climb back into this race. But it will start in Nevada, and if he has another poor showing, that could weaken him in South Carolina.
Well, first of all, Bloomberg is also, a big factor. Yamiche, let's talk about Bloomberg. He's been courting African Americans, creating a new organization to try to reach out to African Americans. At the same time, he's raised a lot of concerns among people I've spoken to, as well as, public criticism. Now Elizabeth Warren criticizing him as well because of his comments about redlining, because of stop and frisk. How does he overcome this?
It's hard to see Michael Bloomberg overcoming this, mainly because there are so many policies that he touched personally as mayor of New York City and that he commented on as mayor of New York City, that it's hard for him to then switch and say, I apologize for all the things I think about. Looking at stop and frisk, this was a policy that he was defending up until the moment that he got into this race. And he said that it was a policy that was needed, that this policy that was deemed unconstitutional was the only way to really police New York City. Then you have his comments about redlining, basically making the case that banks should not have been able to give credit to poor people, when really redlining was about targeting specifically black and brown communities and saying that these people don't deserve the credit to buy a home. Really, now looking back, there are a lot of experts who look at the housing crash and say there were people who were targeting black and brown people and actually giving them credit in a way that was hurting their community. So rather than putting the blame on the people that were possibly taking advantage of people, he was putting the blame on the community. So I think he's going to continue to have very fierce backlash. And of course, Elizabeth Warren is being very vocal about this. She has a housing plan, but she's also trying to make a little bit of news because she, like Joe Biden, is also struggling and trying to get a little bit of energy back in her campaign and fire up her supporters.
Now, but how do you explain the very prominent, influential African-American members of Congress, the mayors who've been signing on to Mike Bloomberg? I think it is, from my reporting, that they are very worried that the putative frontrunner, Joe Biden, is not going to make it, and they're looking for an alternative to Bernie Sanders.
Well, I think there's that, but there's also this idea that Michael Bloomberg has been an ally of people who were focused on gun violence. Take Lucy McBath. She's a congresswoman now. She came to be known publicly because of her son Jordan Davis being shot and a man being placed in and being sentenced because he murdered her son. But she said Michael Bloomberg was someone who was an ally to me when it came to gun violence. You have someone, he also gave $5 million to the voting rights organization run by Stacey Abrams in Georgia that's looking at voter suppression. So he has been in some ways doing things that African Americans find to be an ally and find him to be an ally in some ways. But I think they're going to be his opponents who will continue to remind people that he was the mayor who liked stop and frisk, that he was the mayor who talked about redlining in the way that he did.
Dan Balls, when I was talking to Jim Clyburn yesterday, African-American vote is 60% of the Democratic primary vote, and he made it very clear he's not endorsing yet. He has not stepped in, although his grandson, I think it's his grandson, is working for Joe Biden. But this is really high noon, if you will, to mix metaphors for Joe Biden. He has to win South Carolina. Clyburn said, if he doesn't win, it's precarious, and basically signaled it could mean the end of his campaign.
Well, I think that's right. The only hesitation I have in saying that's exactly right is that we've seen some odd things happen in this campaign already. You saw Amy Klobuchar run 5th in the state next to her home state and suddenly come back and do a strong third. And I think every campaign, particularly the Biden campaign and the Warren campaign, takes some hope that things are so messy right now and so unpredictable that a bit of a spark can get them back in it. But I think you're absolutely right about South Carolina for Vice President Biden. It has been the key state on the calendar for that campaign from the very start. If he falters in South Carolina, it's hard to see that he has any real momentum going into Super Tuesday.
And we should point out that We expect that Mike Bloomberg will be on the debate stage for the first time in Nevada next week. And this could be tough because they're all going to be gunning for him, Dan.
Well, they will be, although they're all going to be gunning for one another in a sense. But I think there are a number of the candidates who are eager to have Michael Bloomberg on that stage and to be able to go after him. He has a mixed record. The things that Yamiche was talking about are potential problems with voters for him, put aside the support he has with African-American mayors, which is impressive, but his record is mixed. There are certain things he's done on gun violence and on climate change that warm the hearts of liberals in the party, and there are things he's done with stop and frisk and the redlining and other things that will make people pause. One of the reasons he has support from so many mayors is that they have worked with him over the years, and they have a lot of respect for him. The second is that he has funded programs in their communities and elsewhere that they have been able to take advantage of, and in a sense that there is a debt being paid as a result of that. And so the mixed record that he has been kind of on the sidelines. He's had the ability as a candidate to spend all the money to create his own image, and now he's going to have a problem in the debates.
Dan Balls, Garrett Haake, and of course, Yamiche Alcindor, thanks to all. And breaking news just in from the Department of Justice. Federal prosecutors have decided after months and months not to pursue criminal charges against former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. This according to an email sent to McCabe's attorneys. The Washington Post was first to report that the department could make the decision public within days. In a statement to NBC, McCabe's lawyer said, "We are pleased that Andrew McCabe and his family can go on with their lives without this cloud hanging over them." And we can also report from Tom Winter of our team that a letter was delivered to former FBI Director McCabe's attorneys, the Justice Department saying in that letter, "We write to inform you that after careful consideration, the government has decided not to pursue criminal charges against your client." Case closed, I guess. And more on that breaking news just in from the Department of Justice. Federal prosecutors deciding not to pursue criminal charges against former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. NBC News investigative reporter Tom Winter joins me now from New York. Tom, this is a big deal because McCabe was left twisting and twisting for months and months, long after the grand jury had refused to indict him, despite considerable pressure from the White House.
That's correct, Andrea. It's been approximately 5 months since reports came out that a grand jury failed to indict former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, and obviously a significant amount of time after an IG report. The IG report was dated April 13th, 2018, so we're coming up on almost 2 years since it came out that Andy McCabe lacked candor, according to the Inspector General, in interviews that they conducted with him regarding leaks to reporters and some other activities in his time at the FBI. In a letter to Andrew McCabe's attorneys, the Justice Department says, "We write to inform you that after careful consideration, the government has decided not to pursue criminal charges against your client." The letter concludes, Andrea, based on the totality of the circumstances and all of the information known to the government at this time, we consider the matter closed. As you remember, Andrea, it was approximately 2 years ago where the FBI fired Andrew McCabe prior to him being able to retire. And obviously this saga has been going on for a significant amount of time and has certainly caught the president's attention, and his ire on Twitter. Andrea?
Yeah, and I think he was fired only maybe a week or 2 weeks before retirement.
I would need
benefits.
to double check that, but your sense of that is exactly correct.
Tom Winter, thanks so much for the breaking news. And more breaking news now on the foreign front. U.S. officials in Munich at the Global Security Conference there have confirmed that a tentative deal for the first steps, we should point out, with the Taliban that could lead finally to American troops being withdrawn from America's longest war. Joining me now is Ambassador Wendy Sherman, a former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, now at Harvard's Kennedy School, and Admiral James Stavridis, a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. Both of you have long experience with this dreadful war that has consumed America and taken so many American lives and left so many of our men and women wounded. But a lot of caution here. This is the Taliban, and Admiral, We're talking about a tentative deal for a 7-day cessation of violence, roadside bombs and the like, which would then lead to larger talks with the Kabul government itself, perhaps hosted by one of the Scandinavian partners. Is that basically, so we're a long way from peace in our time?
We are so far from peace in our time. Hopefully what we're also far from is a Vietnam-like crash and burn where helicopters are taking off from the roofs of the U.S. Embassy. 3 quick points, Andrea, based on 4 years as NATO commander commanding 150,000 troops in this fight from 2009 to 2013. Number one, there is no war-fighting solution here. We're not going to kill our way to success. We've got to negotiate a conclusion. Number two, the Taliban are implacable, very difficult. The fact that Zal Khalilzad, our brilliant ambassador who is negotiating this thing, Afghan-American, has managed to get it this far is a tribute, given how difficult the opponents are. And number three, however this thing ends up in terms of U.S. troop withdrawals, we need to maintain a conditions-based approach so that we avoid that Vietnam-like crash and burn at the end.
Wendy Sherman, you've been involved in so many of these negotiations with the Taliban, with others. How much would you trust the Taliban? And perhaps even more importantly, there's nothing in this agreement that would protect the rights that were written into the Constitution of Afghanistan after the Taliban was ousted for women. And that was so painstakingly negotiated by Madeleine Albright and you and your other colleagues, and also kept up by the Bush administration, and the very strong importance of the role of women that First Lady Laura Bush held very close to her heart. She was there very often.
Indeed, Andrea, I agree with everything that Admiral Stavridis just said. We are a long way for peace in our time. And to your point, probably one of the most searing episodes in my life as a diplomat was going with then Secretary Albright to the Peshawar refugee camp in Pakistan after the Taliban had driven women and men out of Afghanistan. And indeed, Madeleine and I met with those women because they could only meet with women. And the stories they had to tell, these were teachers and doctors, and they had been completely denigrated. They had been raped. My daughter was a young teenager at the time, and a young teenager told me about watching her sister being raped, about hiding in the closet, just horrible, horrible stories. So indeed, when it comes to an agreement with the Kabul government, and the Taliban has completely dismissed the Kabul government, so those peace talks are certainly going to be something. We have to make sure that women are at the table and that they indeed ensure their rights. Laura Bush has continued her work with women in Afghanistan, and I really applaud her for that effort.
And I just wanted to also share with you that our colleague Richard Engel has just concluded an interview with Foreign Minister Zarif in Munich, and we wanted to play a little bit about from that interview about how close the Iranian foreign minister believes we were to war, all-out war, over the Soleimani killing. Let's watch.
How close were the United States and Iran to war? It seemed very close to me from where I was.
We were very close to a war because the United States initiated an act of aggression against Iran in a very, excuse the language, cowardly way.
Was Iran trying to kill American troops?
No, we wanted to show to the United States that they cannot bully Iran, that actions against Iran will have repercussions. But the intention was not to kill anybody.
Where do we stand now with Iran, Admiral?
That is a very interesting admission from the foreign minister, which I think speaks volumes of the fact that Iran is not looking to get into a war with the United States. 2 points to be made here. One is the current debate on the Hill about war powers. I think this puts it sharply in focus. I agree that we were within inches of getting into a war. War defined in this case, Andrea, as massive strikes against Iran, attacks in the Persian Gulf, shutting down the Gulf, shipping, all of that. We were so close. that should not happen without the Congress having a voice in it. So that, I think, is one key point and takeaway. And number two, at this point, I think the Iranians are going to lean back and wait for the election. There are two very different paths forward following the election. And I think they would be well considered to kind of stand down on anything too dramatic at this point, see what the wind blows across in November, and then we'll have to reassess that U.S.-Iranian relationship. Last point, the fundamentals are not good here. And again, there is no military solution here. We've got to arrive at a diplomatic way to solve this, the kind of thing that Ambassador Wendy Sherman has devoted her life to doing.
And, of course, Iran also has their own parliamentary elections, and it would not be good to get into war before that is resolved. And I don't want to let the week to close without sharing a little bit more of Marie Yovanovitch's speech at Georgetown, the first time she's spoken out since almost a year ago. She was forced out of her position. This is the career ambassador who's no longer with the State Department, Marie Yovanovitch.
Throwing up our hands is a self-fulfilling prophecy. In these trying times, optimism is no longer a default setting for many of us. It's a choice. We could be pessimistic and sort of give up unilaterally, or we can believe in ourselves and in our country, do the hard work, make our own luck, and hopefully prevail. We always have a choice.
Wendy Sherman, the best and the brightest. Another person forced out of the State Department.
Just extraordinary. Masha Yovanovitch is just amazing. I run the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard Kennedy School and teach students to become exactly the kind of public servant that Masha Yovanovitch, that Ambassador Yovanovitch is. In those comments, she talked about principled, effective leadership. She talked about how every student at Georgetown, at Princeton, where she went, Harvard, where I teach, are privileged, and they should be about servant leadership. Well, she is the emblem of servant leadership and is holding on to optimism, even as the State Department has been hollowed out. She is my hero today and the hero of many people every day.
And just to add one other point to that, boy, is that the American story. It's that immigrant voice, and Masha was ambassador when I was Supreme Allied Commander. She is everything Wendy Sherman just said and more.
Thank you so much for your perspectives. I knew I could count on the two of you who know everything and everyone. Admiral James Stavridis, Ambassador Wendy Sherman, thank you so much. President Trump says that he would be open to voting for a gay presidential candidate. He was asked about this by Geraldo Rivera on his radio show yesterday.
Would Americans vote for a gay man to be president?
I think so. I think there would be some that wouldn't, and, you know, I wouldn't be among that group, to be honest with you. But I think that, yes, I think that it doesn't seem to be hurting Pete Buttigieg, as you say, as you would call him. It doesn't seem to be hurting him very much. And but there would certainly be a group, you know this better than I do, there'd be a group that probably wouldn't.
This, of course, despite the fact that Rush Limbaugh, the man that the president gave such honor to in a unique conferring of the Medal of Freedom at the State of the Union address, had a screed, a homophobic screed against Pete Buttigieg just the other day. Joining me now is Charlie Sykes, editor-at-large at The Bulwark, and Rick Tyler, Republican strategist and former communications director for Senator Ted Cruz, and Adam Jentlison, former deputy chief of staff to Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid of Nevada. And Nevada is coming up next week.
No, he is.
Interesting cross currents here. Let's talk about Nevada for a second, because Joe Biden has to do better in Nevada for his sake, even going into South Carolina, where South Carolinians are going to say, well, why are we sticking with him when he has no future because of how poorly he had done in the first races? And he may well do better in Nevada because it is a much more diverse field. But the Culinary Union has failed to endorse. They could have endorsed him since they're against Bernie on his Medicare for All. How do you read that?
That's right. I think the failure of the Biden campaign to secure the culinary endorsement was a blow to them. Culinary is obviously not going to endorse Senator Sanders. They've made that very clear. But I think endorsing Biden was still an option. And so that's a blow to Biden.
And what about Harry Reid? Everyone talks about the Reid machine. We've seen him work his wonders in the past. Is he just watching, or is he playing another role? Or?
Well, you know, Senator Reid, as always, is paying very close attention to everything that's going on in Nevada. I think that he, first and foremost, thinks the sanctity of the caucus and the ability of every campaign to feel like they've had a fair shot at winning the caucus is first and foremost in his mind. As you know, he was key in getting the caucus moved up on the calendar, which has been a huge boon for Democrats in Nevada. It's helped Democrats there turn it from what used to be a red state into a pretty reliably blue state these days. So, you know, he's got the greater good in mind here. His foremost goal is to make sure Democrats can continue to win in Nevada up and down the ballot and delivered for presidential candidates.
Rick Tyler, as you look at the Democratic race, they came out of New Hampshire so fragmented, with the leaderboard really changed, with Amy Klobuchar's surprisingly strong finish based on the momentum, I think, coming out of that very strong debate performance, and Elizabeth Warren so far behind, and Joe Biden coming in fifth.
I think Amy Klobuchar probably benefited most from Iowa sort of being a muddle, because she did come in fifth. And it's interesting that she's from the Midwest and she was basically rejected there. But New Hampshire voters, she finished very strong there. Joe Biden finishing fifth in New Hampshire, to me, that's the story for him. I think it's over for him, because his theory of the race, as we say in the business, is over. His theory was that he was the person who could beat Donald Trump, and nobody believes that anymore, or at least half the people who did believe it don't believe it. And now you see that Buttigieg and Klobuchar are also, the people believe that they could beat Trump, and Mike Bloomberg can beat Trump. So Biden has got to come back, if not Nevada, in South Carolina, but I'm very skeptical. I think everybody's in the market for a new candidate.
What about Bernie Sanders, Charlie Sykes? Rick did not mention that Bernie Sanders could beat Donald Trump.
Yeah, I'm in the camp of people who don't think that Bernie Sanders can win this election. I think I've been talking to a lot of swing voters here in Wisconsin, people who are really disgusted and disillusioned by Donald Trump. And then, by the way, there are swing voters, and that they might vote for one of the more moderate centrist Democrats, but they're not going to vote for a Democratic socialist. They're not going to vote for Bernie Sanders. And, you know, I think Democrats have to think, what happens to Bernie Sanders after $1 billion of Oppo research is dumped on him, after the media vetting, which was really not taking place aggressively, really dismantles him? You know, is this country prepared for 4 years of radical change and massive disruption of the economy? Are they willing to vote for somebody who is going to take away their private insurance? So this is a question that I think the Democrats really need to talk about, and the anxiety that you're hearing among Senate and House Democrats, I think, is not ill-placed. That in fact Bernie Sanders, as the head of the ticket, could have tremendous consequences all up and down that ticket.
And Rick, what about the Republicans in the Senate? You know them so well. Who's going to object to the president? When are they going to say, well, maybe we were wrong about him learning his lessons from impeachment?
Never.
Look at his behavior this week.
Look, members of the Senate, as much as we like to call them leaders, are actually followers, and too many of them are looking at their own states where Donald Trump is popular, and they think their political fortunes are wed to him. You know, I've been often critical of Mitt Romney, but you got to hand it to him that he at least stood up and said, you know, that the president committed acts that were worthy of impeachment. I think that's right, and he said so, and he'll be remembered for that.
Indeed. Charlie Sykes, Rick Tyler, and Adam Gentleson. Sorry. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Andrea.
And coming up, deconstruction. The Trump administration is taking a jackhammer to the National Security Council. What's that all about? You're watching Andrea Mitchell Reports on MSNBC. Big changes at the National Security Council. According to John Gans, a former Pentagon speechwriter, over the last 6 months, Robert O'Brien undertook the first restructuring of the council in a generation. He cut 60 to 70 positions, about a third of the staff, many of them career professionals. In all, Mr. O'Brien's Trumpification of the staff will hamper the United States' ability to meet the world's challenges and hamstring the next president. And then you see Alexander Vindman was one of those people pushed out, and his twin brother. Joining me now, the author of that opinion piece, John Gans, a former chief speechwriter for the Pentagon. His new book is White House Warriors: How the National Security Council Transformed the American Way of War. And now we have the Trump administration transforming the NSC. How's that working out?
Well, so far, you know, the president was complaining for a long time about witch hunts in Washington, and he's going on a snake hunt. Snakes are what he's been calling, reportedly calling, those in government who oppose him. And the snake hunt, really, its first target is the National Security Council, which is the group of staffers that was created in 1947 to help presidents meet the challenges of a complicated, interconnected world. And Donald Trump and Robert O'Brien, really over the last 6 months, have gutted the staff, making it both less adept, less capable of sort of doing all of the jobs it used to do, all the dot connecting it used to do, and to a degree undermining America's ability to sort of meet some of these complicated challenges like coronavirus and other things.
John, the former Defense Secretary Ash Carter, who's now at Harvard and MIT, was with me last night at the 92nd Street Y, and we talked about Alexander Vindman and his brother, both ousted unceremoniously from the NSC, clearly retaliation. And then, of course, the Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, said that there would be no actions taken against them, but the president then said, well, there should be. They're considering it. This is what Ash Carter had to say about that last night.
You have to kind of respect professionalism. And when you do something like that to somebody who's a professional and was doing his duty as he saw it, it's more than just a transgression against that individual. It's a transgression against something that the professionalism of government.
I mean, Alexander Vindman, according to Barry McCaffrey, a retired four-star, and one of our, obviously, senior advisors, contributors here, was part of an elite group of military people trained in languages who were brought to the NSC because of what they could contribute. And then all he did to get pushed out was to answer a subpoena and testify to as honestly as he could under oath.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is very clearly not about Alexander Vindman's performance in his job. I mean, you know, Donald Trump has claimed he never talked to him, never met with him, and Robert O'Brien reportedly didn't meet with him. This isn't about his performance in the job. This is very clearly about what he did in last fall when he sort of stood up and did what he thought was right and did what everybody else sort of thinks is right, which is to tell the truth when asked questions about what they saw. But it's important to remember that this downsizing the NSC all started in September of last year, which is exactly the same time as the Ukraine scheme sort of blew up. The whistleblowers report went live in September at the end of September, and Robert O'Brien at his first town hall on October 10th told the National Security Council he was gutting the staff. He was going to cut it by a third. And so what you sort of see is this is about more than Vindman. This is about, in some ways, punishing an institution that didn't play along with the Ukraine scheme and punishing those who sort of were willing to step up and testify to Congress and tell everybody and tell us, the public, what happened.
There was certainly criticism that under President Obama, the NSC was bloated, not what it was originally intended to be. But basically, what the professionals at the NSC do is, in different bureaus for different parts of the world, different divisions, they report up facts, intelligence. They help inform the decision makers. And you don't have that, and you also don't have a national security cabinet anymore with great experience.
Yeah, they connect the dots, right? They help make sure that all the pieces in government are talking to each other and all the policies sort of are synchronized. And I think what you sort of see is even more than just punishing those who oppose Donald Trump, this is about imposing his worldview on the National Security Council, focusing less on sort of transnational issues like global economics and global health and more on just the geographic transactional deals he likes to make with other heads of state.
We've got to leave it there. Thank you so much, John Gans. That's it for today. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Chris Jansing is in New York.
Happy Valentine's Day to you.